Mary sat in her dimly lit office, the air thick with the weight of uncertainty. The orphanage had been her life's work, the only thing that had ever truly mattered to her, but now it was slipping through her fingers like sand. The letter on her desk was not the first of its kind, but it was the one that had shattered all hope. The government had deemed the building unsafe, the funds were running dry, and she had exactly 30 days before the orphanage would be shut down forever. She had spent the last few months knocking on every door, calling every potential donor, exhausting every possible avenue to secure enough funds to repair the facility. But people had stopped listening. Charities were overlooked, and orphanages like St. Mary's had long been forgotten by the world. The desperation clawed at her throat, making it hard to breathe. The children had no idea what was coming. They still laughed, played, and clung to the hope that Mary would always find a way. But for the first time in her life, she did not know if she could. The thought of failing them was unbearable. These were not just children abandoned by the world. They were her family. Every one of them had a story, a past marked by loss and suffering. She had spent years wiping away their tears, helping them heal, and giving them a reason to believe in kindness again. If the orphanage closed, where would they go? Some would be placed in overcrowded foster homes, shuffled between strangers who saw them as burdens rather than children. The older ones, particularly the boys, would struggle the most. The system was not built for them. Many of them would be left to fend for themselves, falling through the cracks of society, forgotten once again. The thought made her sick. She could not let that happen. But how could she fight a battle that had already been lost? The ringing of the landline phone made her jump. It had been weeks since anyone had called. Most communications were handled through email these days, and those who did call usually had nothing good to say. With a sinking feeling in her chest, she picked up the receiver, her voice steady despite the dread creeping up her spine. St. Mary's Orphanage. This is Mary speaking. The silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably long. Just as she was about to hang up, a voice spoke, deep, steady, and devoid of emotion. You will receive help. The line went dead. She held the phone to her ear for a moment longer, her pulse quickening. The voice had been unfamiliar, neither warm nor threatening, but something about it unsettled her. Help? What kind of help? From whom? And why the secrecy? She barely slept that night, the words replaying in her mind like a broken record. By morning, she had convinced herself it had been a cruel prank. People had strange ways of entertaining themselves, and the internet was filled with stories of scams and hoaxes targeting struggling organizations like hers. But when she stepped outside to check the mail, she found something that made her blood run cold. A black luxury car was parked near the orphanage gates, engine humming softly, as if waiting for something. Or someone. A sharply dressed man stepped out, holding a thick envelope in his gloved hands. He walked toward her with measured steps, his face unreadable. "Miss Mary?" he asked. His voice was polite, professional. She nodded cautiously. "This is for you." He handed her the envelope, his grip firm but impersonal. Her fingers trembled as she took it. "Who sent this?" she asked. But the man only smiled, his expression giving away nothing. "The sender wishes to remain anonymous," he said before turning on his heel and walking back to the car. Within seconds, the vehicle disappeared down the street, leaving Mary standing there, heart pounding against her ribs. She rushed inside, her breath uneven as she tore open the envelope. Inside, there was no letter, no explanation, just a check. Her hands trembled as she read the amount. $10 million. The room swayed around her, her knees nearly giving out beneath her. This was not a mistake. This was real. Her fingers tightened around the paper, her mind unable to process the sheer magnitude of what she was holding. And then, she saw the small slip of paper tucked inside the envelope. A handwritten note, simple and direct. "For the children, keep fighting." Tears blurred her vision. Who had done this? Who had saved them? The weight of the moment crashed over her like a tidal wave. The orphanage would survive. The children would not have to leave. The repairs could begin immediately. She should have been celebrating, should have been calling every member of her staff to share the miraculous news. But instead, she stood frozen, staring at the note. There was something about it, something unsettling in its simplicity. No name, no request for acknowledgement, just those words, "Keep fighting." But why? And why in secret? Word spread fast. Within hours, reporters were outside the orphanage gates, eager to uncover the identity of the mysterious benefactor. The internet exploded with speculation. Who had given such an enormous sum without seeking credit? Some believed it was a former orphan who had made it big. Others suspected a billionaire with a guilty conscience, someone trying to atone for past sins. But one name kept surfacing more than any other: Elon Musk, the man whose name was synonymous with innovation, wealth, and unpredictability. He had a history of making anonymous donations, of funding projects without taking credit. His philosophy on giving had always been unconventional. Some called him a genius, others called him eccentric. But one thing was clear: if this donation had come from him, the world would never know for sure. Mary had never met Musk, had never even considered reaching out to someone like him. People like him lived in a world so far removed from hers that it seemed impossible they could ever cross paths. Yet, as she stared at the note again, she could not shake the feeling that it belonged to someone who understood struggle, someone who knew what it meant to fight for something bigger than themselves. Could it really be him? The media was relentless. Journalists hounded her with questions, desperate for confirmation. But how could she confirm something she was not sure of herself? She did not have proof. Only a check, a note, and a growing suspicion. The days passed in a blur, the world outside her office growing louder as theories spread like wildfire. But Mary remained quiet, watching as the storm unfolded. She had spent her life teaching the children that kindness was not about recognition, that true generosity came from the heart, not from the desire for praise. If Musk had truly done this, he had chosen to remain silent, and maybe that was the most powerful part of all. She thought of the call she had received, the words still echoing in her mind. "You will receive help." She had received it, and now she had a choice to make. She could chase the truth, could try to uncover the name behind the gift, or she could accept it for what it was, a reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of kindness are the ones that are never seen. The world would continue to speculate. The headlines would come and go, but the children of St. Mary's would sleep soundly, knowing their home was safe. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Mary sat in her office, staring at the check on her desk, her mind clouded with uncertainty. The orphanage had been saved, but the mystery surrounding the donation refused to leave her thoughts. $10 million was not an amount someone simply gave away without a reason, and yet the person behind it had gone to great lengths to remain anonymous. The note that had accompanied the check, though simple in its wording, had left a strange feeling in her chest. It was not just a donation, it felt like a message. The media had already latched onto the story, swarming the orphanage with questions, theories, and relentless speculation. Everyone wanted to know the same thing: who had saved St. Mary's? More importantly, why had they done it in secret? The name that kept appearing in every discussion, every news report, and every online forum was the same: Elon Musk. The billionaire was known for his unconventional ways, his reluctance to play by the rules of the elite, and his belief in silent philanthropy. But if this donation had come from him, why go to such great lengths to hide it? Why erase his name from the act of kindness? She had always believed that generosity should be selfless, that true kindness did not need recognition. But something about this situation felt different. If Elon Musk was truly behind this, what was he trying to prove? And why would someone like him care about an orphanage buried in the outskirts of a struggling city? The questions gnawed at her, refusing to let her rest. She had tried to push them aside, to focus on the repairs and the children, but every time she saw the check, the note, or the news coverage, she felt an undeniable pull. She needed answers, not for the public, not for the journalists crowding outside her door, but for herself. She needed to understand why someone had given her a miracle and walked away as if it meant nothing. Her first instinct was to reach out to the bank that had issued the check. Maybe they could at least confirm if it had come from Musk's accounts. But when she finally got through to a representative, the response was disappointing. The donor had used a private account, and the details had been deliberately sealed. No additional information could be shared. Mary hung up, frustration building inside her. Whoever had done this had not just remained anonymous, they had ensured that no trail could be followed. This was not the act of someone seeking gratitude. It was the work of someone who wanted their generosity to stay invisible. But why? What was the point of helping if no one knew you had done it? She spent the next few days going through every possible lead, scouring the internet for clues, rereading past interviews of Musk, searching for any hint that he had been involved. But he had always been careful, always dodging questions about his private donations, always brushing them off as unimportant. And yet, the handwriting on the note haunted her. It was casual, rushed, but something about it felt strangely familiar. Had she seen it before? Or was her mind simply convincing her of what she wanted to believe? The speculation online had already taken a life of its own. Some claimed to have inside sources confirming Musk's involvement, while others insisted it was all just a coincidence. But one article stood out to her more than the rest. A journalist named James Carter had written a piece titled, "The Billionaire Who Gives in Secret." His theory was simple. Musk had been secretly funding humanitarian efforts for years, using various aliases and unknown accounts. The money always seemed to appear when it was needed the most, but no official statement was ever released, no acknowledgement ever made. He believed that Musk had created a system where he could help people without ever being tied to the act itself. And for some reason, that idea unsettled her more than anything else. If this was true, how many other lives had been changed without anyone ever knowing? And more importantly, why did he refuse to take credit? She reached for her laptop, opening a blank email draft. She hesitated for a moment before typing a message to James Carter. "I need to know the truth. Meet me." She hit send before she could talk herself out of it. She had spent years teaching the children at the orphanage that kindness was the greatest gift a person could offer. But what did it mean when the person giving refused to be seen? The following afternoon, James Carter arrived at the orphanage, his presence commanding attention. He was not just another reporter looking for a story. He was someone who had spent years chasing the truth. He sat across from Mary in her office, his eyes sharp with curiosity. "You believe it was Musk?" he said, his tone calm, measured. It was not a question. It was a statement. Mary folded her arms, studying him carefully. "Everyone seems to believe that." James leaned forward slightly. "And what do you believe?" She hesitated before answering. "I do not know, but I need to find out." He pulled out a folder, sliding it across the desk toward her. "You are not alone in that." Mary opened the folder, her breath catching as she scanned the documents inside. They were records of past anonymous donations, schools, hospitals, research programs, all receiving funds with no official donor listed. And in each case, the pattern was the same. A single note, handwritten, with a message of encouragement. The same style, the same signature. "It all traces back to him," James said quietly. Mary swallowed hard. "Then why cover it up? Why not let people know?" James smiled faintly. "Because if people knew, they would expect it. They would stop trying to help themselves. They would rely on him instead of learning to fight for themselves." His words sent a chill through her. The explanation was logical, almost noble, yet it felt so foreign in a world where people fought for credit over the smallest gestures. Had Elon Musk really dedicated years of his life to secretly funding causes without ever seeking recognition? If that was true, what kind of man did that make him? James leaned back, watching her process the information. "The question is, what are you going to do with this?" Mary stared at the papers in front of her, her thoughts a tangled mess. If she came forward with this, the world would finally have confirmation. But would it be the right thing to do? If Musk had gone to such great lengths to hide his acts of kindness, did she have the right to expose them? The weight of the decision settled heavily on her shoulders. James tapped his fingers against the desk. If you do not tell the story, someone else will. Mary exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Maybe, she said quietly, but maybe some stories are not meant to be told. James watched her for a long moment before standing. That is your choice to make. After he left, Mary sat in silence, staring at the note that had come with the check. For the children. Keep fighting. She traced the words with her fingers, her mind made up. Some people helped because they wanted to be seen. Others helped because it was the right thing to do. And maybe, just maybe, the greatest acts of kindness were the ones that no one ever knew about. She closed the folder and placed it inside her desk, locking it away. The world would keep guessing. The headlines would continue. But Mary knew the truth. And somehow, that was enough. Mary sat in her office, staring at the check on her desk, the weight of the situation pressing against her chest. The $10 million donation had saved the orphanage, yet she could not shake the feeling that there was something more behind it. The children were safe, the repairs had already begun, and yet the mystery surrounding the anonymous donor refused to leave her mind. She had spent the entire night thinking about it, unable to ignore the growing curiosity burning inside her. Who had given such a large amount without wanting any recognition? Most wealthy individuals loved publicity, using their donations as a way to gain social approval, yet this one had been hidden deliberately. The handwriting on the note that came with the check had been simple, almost rushed, but there was something familiar about it. The more she looked at it, the more she felt that she had seen it before. The theories that had started circulating online pointed to one name: Elon Musk. The billionaire was known for his charitable efforts, and there had been whispers before about his anonymous donations, but no one had ever been able to confirm them. If he really had done this, why would he not take credit for it? She ran her fingers over the edges of the check, her thoughts clouded with uncertainty. Did it even matter? The orphanage had been saved, and that was all she had ever wanted. Yet something deep inside told her that she needed to know the truth. Not because it would change anything, but because something about the secrecy felt important. She had never been one to chase rumors, but this was different. It was not about fame or exposure. It was about understanding why someone would go to such lengths to remain invisible in an act of kindness. As she reached for her laptop, an email notification popped up on the screen. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the subject line. You are asking the right questions. There was no sender name, no introduction, just a short message that made her pulse quicken. If you want answers, meet me tomorrow at 10 a.m. Red Oak Cafe. Come alone. She read the message twice, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. This could be a hoax, a trap, or just another journalist trying to dig for a story. But something about it felt real. If there was even the slightest chance that this person had information, she needed to go. The next morning, she arrived at the cafe, scanning the room with cautious eyes. It was a small, quiet place, the scent of coffee and fresh bread lingering in the air. In the farthest booth, a man raised his hand slightly, signaling her over. He looked like someone who had spent years avoiding attention, his clothes plain, his eyes sharp but weary. As she sat down across from him, he wasted no time. You're looking for answers, he said in a low voice, his fingers tapping against the table. I can give them to you. She studied him, unsure of whether to trust him. Who are you? She asked, keeping her tone steady. He smirked slightly as if he had expected the question. Call me David. That is all you need to know. He leaned in, lowering his voice. The money came from Musk. You already suspected that, did you not? Her breath caught in her throat. She had thought it was possible, but hearing someone confirm it made it real. Why would he keep it a secret? She asked. David sighed, glancing around the cafe before responding. Because he does not want the world to expect it from him. If people knew he did this, they would stop trying to help themselves. They would wait for him to fix their problems instead of finding their own solutions. Mary felt a shiver run down her spine. The explanation was so simple yet so profound. Most billionaires use their wealth to gain admiration, but Musk had deliberately erased his name from his acts of kindness. He believes true generosity should not come with recognition, David continued. That is why no one talks about it. He does not allow them to. She frowned. So, you are saying he has done this before? David nodded. Many times. Different names, different channels, but it all traces back to him. Mary sat back, absorbing the weight of his words. If this was true, then Elon Musk had been quietly changing lives for years without ever seeking applause. It was the opposite of what most people expected from billionaires. If you have proof, why has no one exposed it? She asked, narrowing her eyes. David gave a knowing smile. Because no one wants to be the one to go against his wishes. And because people like me, we respect what he is trying to do. She felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, admiration, and an overwhelming sense of understanding. All her life, she had fought to keep the orphanage running, relying on the goodwill of others. Yet here was a man who had the power to change the world and had chosen to do it in silence. There was something undeniably noble about that. David stood up, signaling the end of their meeting. You have your answers. What you do with them is up to you. He left without another word, disappearing into the busy streets as if he had never been there. Mary walked back to the orphanage in a daze, her mind spinning. She had spent so much time wondering about the donor's identity, never expecting that the real story would be about something much bigger. It was not about the money, it was about the philosophy behind it. The belief that true kindness should not be performative, that giving should come from the heart and not for the sake of recognition. She sat at her desk that evening, staring at the check one last time before finally placing it in the safe. Her laptop screen glowed in the dimly lit office, the blank document waiting for her to type. She had enough information to confirm the truth, enough to write an article that would shake the world. But as she thought about it, she realized she could not do it. Some stories were not meant to be told. Some acts of kindness were meant to stay in the shadows, where they belonged. She deleted the email, closed her laptop, and leaned back in her chair, feeling a sense of peace she had not felt in weeks. Elon Musk did not need credit. He did not need headlines or public praise. He had done what he had set out to do. He had saved the children. And that was enough. Mary smiled to herself as she turned off the office light. The world would never know the truth. But somehow that made it even more beautiful. The sound of laughter filled the orphanage courtyard as children played, their voices echoing against the newly painted walls. The repairs had begun just a few days ago, and already the place looked alive again. Fresh coats of paint covered the once fading walls, the broken windows had been replaced, and soon the new heating system would be installed before winter arrived. The transformation was nothing short of a miracle. But while the world celebrated the orphanage's revival, Mary found herself restless. She stood at the edge of the courtyard, watching the children chase each other, their innocent faces free from the worries that had consumed her for weeks. They had no idea how close they had come to losing their home. They did not know about the late nights she had spent searching for donors, the countless rejections, or the sheer helplessness she had felt before the donation had arrived. They only knew they were safe now. And perhaps that was how it should be. She had told herself she would let it go. That it did not matter where the money had come from, as long as it had saved the children. But no matter how much she tried to ignore it, the mystery lingered like an unsolved puzzle. Every time she saw the check, the note, or heard Musk's name mentioned in the news, the questions resurfaced. If it had been him, why had he gone to such great lengths to stay hidden? Why not let the world know about his generosity? She thought back to her conversation with James Carter and his theory that Musk believed true generosity should be unseen. that revealing his donations would turn acts of kindness into mere expectations. The logic made sense, but it still left her unsettled. That evening, she sat in her office, the check still locked in the drawer beside her. She had not touched it since the day it arrived. The funds had already been processed, the orphanage's future secured, and yet she could not shake the feeling that this story was not over. The media had not let go of it either. Speculations continued to swirl, and while Musk had remained silent, the world had not. Every time he posted on social media, comments flooded his accounts, asking if he had been the one to save St. Mary's. Yet he never responded. Not a denial, not a confirmation, just silence. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. She turned to see Jack, one of the older boys, peeking inside hesitantly. "Miss Mary," he said quietly, stepping inside. "Are you okay?" She smiled, though it did not quite reach her eyes. "Of course, Jack. Just thinking." He sat in the chair across from her, his fingers fidgeting with the hem of his sweater. "People keep talking about the donation," he said carefully. "They keep saying it was that billionaire guy. Do you think it was him?" Mary exhaled, staring at the boy who had grown up before her eyes. Jack had been at the orphanage since he was 5 years old. He was 16 now, and though he still had a few more years before aging out of the system, she worried about his future more than the others. He had always been smart, always questioned everything, and always looked out for the younger kids. "I do not know," she admitted. "And maybe that is okay." Jack frowned. "But don't you want to know?" Mary leaned forward, resting her arms on the desk. "What difference would it make?" Jack shrugged. "I just think if it was me, if I gave away that much money, I would want people to know." She smiled softly. "Maybe that is why it was not you." The boy let out a small chuckle, but his expression quickly grew serious again. "If it was him, that means he actually cares about people like us. Not just the big stuff, like spaceships and electric cars, but real people, kids like us." Mary had never thought about it that way. The world saw Musk as an innovator, a businessman, a genius. But if he had truly done this, then he was also something else. Someone who understood the struggles of those far removed from the world of billionaires. Someone who cared even when no one was watching. Jack stood up, stretching. "Anyway, I just wanted to check on you. You seem different these days." She smiled, squeezing his hand gently. "I am fine, Jack. Really." After he left, she sat in silence, his words lingering in her mind. If Musk had done this, then maybe he was not just the man people thought he was. Maybe he was something more. The next morning, she received a letter in the mail. There was no return address, just her name written in small, neat handwriting. She tore it open, her heartbeat quickening as she unfolded the paper. Inside was another note, written in the same style as the first one. "You asked the right questions. Now ask yourself if you need the answers." Mary's breath caught. Her hands trembled as she reread the words. This was not just a coincidence. Whoever had sent the donation was still watching, still aware. She turned the paper over looking for more, but there was nothing. No name, no instructions, just a question meant to linger in her mind. She sat back in her chair, staring at the note as the weight of it settled over her. Did she need the answers? Would knowing change anything? The orphanage had been saved. The children were safe. The money had done what it was meant to do. Maybe that was enough. She placed the note in the drawer beside the check, locking them away. The world would keep wondering. The journalists would keep chasing the story. But Mary had made her decision. Some mysteries were not meant to be solved. Some kindnesses were meant to remain unseen. And perhaps, in the end, that was the most powerful truth of all. The air inside Mary's office was thick with the weight of unspoken thoughts. She had read the note again and again, each time feeling the same strange mixture of curiosity and acceptance. You asked the right questions. Now ask yourself if you need the answers. The words lingered in her mind like an unfinished melody, tempting her to continue down the path she had been on, to seek the truth behind the donation. But something inside her hesitated. The orphanage had been saved, the children were safe, and the future was secured. Was that not enough? Outside, the sounds of laughter and chatter filtered through the windows, a stark contrast to the storm inside her head. The children were adjusting well to the changes. The once crumbling walls were now freshly painted, the old floors replaced, and the heating system was set to be installed before the colder months arrived. For the first time in years, St. Mary's was not just surviving, it was thriving. But despite everything, Mary could not shake the feeling that there was still something left unanswered. She had spent the past few days avoiding the media, dodging calls from reporters still desperate to confirm whether Elon Musk had been behind the donation. Some had even shown up at the orphanage unannounced, cameras in hand, hoping to catch a reaction that might give them the confirmation they needed. But Mary had remained silent. She had nothing to give them, at least nothing she was willing to share. The world wanted the truth, but Mary had begun to wonder if some truths were better left undiscovered. What if exposing Musk's kindness changed the way people saw him? What if it led to expectations that would eventually tarnish the very reason he had chosen to remain anonymous in the first place? If he had spent years giving without recognition, then revealing him now would only disrupt something that had never been meant for public knowledge. A knock on her door pulled her from her thoughts. She looked up to see Jack standing there, his expression more serious than usual. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation and closed the door behind him. "I think someone's watching," he said, his voice low. Mary frowned, her heart skipping a beat. "Watching? What do you mean?" Jack hesitated before speaking again. "I was out back earlier near the storage shed. There was a car parked across the street just sitting there. I thought it was one of the reporters, but when I went closer, they drove off. Fast." Mary's pulse quickened. "Did you see who was inside?" Jack shook his head. "Tinted windows, but I know when someone's watching, Miss Mary, and that car wasn't just passing by." A chill ran down her spine. Could it be the same person who had sent the note? The same one who had made sure the donation remained a secret? Jack sat down, leaning forward. "I don't get it. Why would someone give away that much money and then make sure no one knows about it? And why keep watching?" Mary exhaled slowly, trying to steady herself. "Maybe because they want to make sure the money is being used the way it was intended," Jack scoffed. "Or maybe they're making sure you don't say anything you're not supposed to." The weight of his words settled in the room like an unwelcome guest. Mary had thought about that too. She had received the donation, she had asked questions, and then suddenly she had received a warning disguised as advice. Now there was a car outside watching. It was too much to be a coincidence. That night she barely slept. Every sound outside her window made her sit up, every shadow made her heart race. Was it paranoia? Or was someone truly making sure she stayed silent? The next morning she made a decision. She had to know. If this had been any other donation, if it had come with a name and a handshake, she would have been grateful and moved on. But this had not been normal. The secrecy, the calculated effort to erase any trace of the donor's identity, it all pointed to something much bigger than a simple act of kindness. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she had avoided calling. James Carter answered on the first ring. "I was wondering when you'd call," he said, sounding amused. Mary took a deep breath. "I need to know the truth." James chuckled. "I thought you had decided to let this go." "I did," she admitted. "But now, I don't think I can." There was a pause on the other end before James spoke again. "Meet me at the old library on 5th Street, noon, come alone." The line went dead before she could respond. She left the orphanage later that morning, making sure no one followed her. When she arrived at the library, James was already waiting, a folder in front of him on the wooden table. He gestured for her to sit. "I did some more digging," he said, tapping the folder, "and I found something interesting." Mary braced herself as she opened it. Inside were bank statements, records of past anonymous donations, and a list of charities that had received large, unexplained sums over the years. The pattern was clear. "It all points back to him," James said. "Musk." James studied her for a moment. "That's up to you. Do you expose it? Do you stay silent? Either way, you hold the answer the world wants." She sat there for a long moment, the weight of the decision settling over her. Some secrets were meant to be kept, and maybe, just maybe, this was one of them. The days that followed felt heavier than the ones before. The donation had changed everything, yet it had left Mary with more questions than answers. The orphanage was safe, the repairs were nearly complete, and for the first time in years, she did not have to worry about how to keep the doors open. But there was a shadow over it all, the knowledge that someone was still watching, making sure she followed an unspoken rule of silence. The car that Jack had seen had not returned, but the unease it left behind had not faded. She had spent years believing that kindness was meant to be seen, that good deeds should inspire others to do the same. But now she found herself questioning that belief. If Elon Musk had really given them the money, why had he refused to take credit? Why had he chosen to remain unseen? Most billionaires would have taken the opportunity to shine in the public eye, to be praised for their generosity. Yet Musk had done the opposite. He had erased himself from the act entirely. Mary sat alone in her office, the check no longer on her desk but locked away in a safe. The handwritten note still lingered in her mind. "For the children, keep fighting." The words had seemed so simple at first, but now they felt loaded with meaning. Maybe this was never about recognition. Maybe it was about something bigger, something she had not yet understood. A soft knock on the door startled her. She looked up to see Jack standing there, his face unreadable. He stepped inside and shut the door behind him before speaking. "I saw that car again," he said quietly. Mary's heart skipped a beat. "Where?" "Down the street. It wasn't parked this time, but it slowed down when I was outside. Then it drove off." She frowned, gripping the edge of her desk. "Did you get a better look?" Jack shook his head. "Still tinted windows. But Miss Mary, I don't think they're here to hurt us. If they wanted to, they would have done something by now." Mary exhaled slowly, considering his words. He was right. Whoever was behind this was not threatening them. They were just making sure she stayed quiet. That night, as she sat in her office long after the children had gone to bed, she found herself staring at the folder James had given her. Inside were names, dates, records of past donations, each one linked to anonymous contributions that had helped people in desperate need. Hospitals, schools, shelters. Each time, the money had come with no name attached, only small handwritten notes of encouragement. It was impossible to ignore the pattern. Mary flipped through the pages, her mind racing. If Musk had been doing this for years, how had no one ever exposed him? Was it because the recipients, like her, had chosen to keep it a secret? Or was there something more to it? A thought struck her then, one she had not considered before. What if he was waiting to see if she would break the silence? She looked at the note again. "Keep fighting." Maybe it was not just about the orphanage. Maybe it was a test. The next morning she made her choice. She had spent weeks struggling with the question of whether to reveal the truth. The journalists wanted an answer. The world wanted confirmation. But the truth was not hers to give. Some things were more powerful when left unsaid. When James Carter called her again, she ignored it. When reporters showed up outside, she walked past them without a word. When Jack asked her if she was ever going to tell the world, she simply shook her head. One evening, as she sat outside watching the children play, a black car pulled up near the orphanage. Her heart pounded, but she forced herself to stay calm. The window rolled down just enough for her to see a figure inside, a man in the driver's seat, partially hidden by the shadows. She could not see his face clearly, but she did not need to. She knew. He did not speak. He did not wave. He only waited a moment, then gave a small nod before rolling up the window and driving away. Mary sat there for a long time, her hands clasped together, her breath shaky. Some secrets were meant to stay hidden, and the greatest acts of kindness were the ones no one ever knew about. Not all heroes wear capes, and not all acts of kindness demand recognition. In a world where charity is often used for applause, there exist those who give not for the cameras, not for the headlines, but for the quiet impact their generosity leaves behind. If this story moved you, ask yourself, would you help someone without expecting anything in return? True kindness is not about being seen. It is about making a difference, even when no one is watching.